The American ideal is linked with images of rural America and the promise of abundance and well-being. But for many rural Americans, this promise is not realized. During the 1930s, millions suffered in rural misery. During the 1960s, a presidential commission called the rural poor the people left behind, and today many remain behind. Persistent poverty and substandard housing continue to plague rural America. More than 1 million homes are inadequate. Almost 10 million rural people live in poverty. Housing problems exist throughout rural areas, but are concentrated in several pockets of persistent poverty. The lower Mississippi Delta in the southeast, American Indian and Alaskan Native lands, Appalachia, and the colonias along the United States-Mexican border. Low wages and high housing costs make decent housing unaffordable to many rural people. The great majority of low-income people spend more than they can afford for housing, leaving little for other needs. A lack of public water and sewer lines and paved roads make addressing these problems difficult. The greatest barrier is our national budget priorities. Funding for housing programs has been slashed since 1980 and faces more cuts. Congressman Bennie Thompson.
Programs like rural housing fall by the wayside or get drastically cut. So it's a problem that I guess by being poor in this country, you just suffer the penalty of not getting your voice adequately heard or represented in the halls of Congress.
Fortunately, community groups are working hard to bring needed resources into their local areas. These groups offer hope and concrete assistance to the rural poor.
If I had to categorize the housing conditions in Southern Maryland, I'd talk about two primary issues. One is overcrowding and two is substandard housing.
The Tri-County Community Development Corporation, TCDC, works in Southern Maryland, hours from the nation's capital.
What do we find in this area is that a lot of our units lack plumbing facilities. In many cases, we find that in some of these substandard units, there's essentially no electricity or the unit is poorly wired. The sanitation conditions have an impact upon health and the quality of life in that family.
The home Helen Chase has lived in for 46 years has no indoor plumbing.
I need help with the whole house, please. I need running water. I'm tired of toting water.
Using funds from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Farmers Home Administration, Tri-County Community Development Corporation rehabilitates existing homes and develops low-income rental and single-family units.
We do mutual self-help housing, which in itself represents, I think, one of the greatest activities in this country. The ability for people to work themselves, to improve their lifestyles, to create communities. This is a real opportunity for people not to have a handout, but a handout.
I never had a home before. It came about 6 years ago, well, 7 years ago probably. And I filled out an application for the housing, and before I knew it, I was going for the interview, and one step left to lead to another, you know.
The process involved is about a year long. Individuals work in the evenings and on weekends on their own houses in groups of about 10. No one concentrates on their own house. Everyone concentrates on all of the units, and no one can move in until every house is completed.
You know, sometimes I say to myself, is this real, you know? But it's really real. It's a lot of work, but it's going to work every bit of it when we get finished. Oh, yes.
Despite the desperate need for decent housing, many community organizations experience local opposition to affordable housing developments.
I think low-income housing is so stereotyped, particularly in the media, that families and communities fear it. And as a result of not understanding and not having to live in an environment near low-income people, often families resist us moving in.
TCDC overcame local resistance through community education, political action, and award-winning architectural design. Today, Prince Frederick Villas houses 25 low-income families. Since 1971, the Housing Assistance Council has provided help to local groups such as TCDC. HAC provides research, training, technical assistance, and loans to increase the availability of decent housing for rural low-income people.
Rural America faces a lack of institutions and a lack of support to address those housing problems. And we find that in many parts of the country where there are organizations working towards addressing those problems, units are being built, families' needs are being met, decent housing is being created. The unfortunate thing is that we don't have enough of them, and that we have many parts of the country where, because they don't exist, the problems of bad housing, unaffordable housing, indecent living conditions continue.
Persistent poverty and substandard housing also abound in Appalachia. The Eastern West Virginia Community Action Agency pulls together financial resources from a variety of federal, state, and private programs to provide decent, affordable housing for low-income families.
Housing is an extremely complicated kind of business, and a lot of times we're working in the hardest segment of that. We're working with families who can't afford to just go to the bank under traditional terms and get a loan.
We have been using the main bathroom. The floor is really starting to give.
So a lot of times it means maybe working to get down payment money from one lending source and working to get construction money from another source, and then trying to finance the house to them on a permanent basis from even a third source. So any one of those pieces alone wouldn't solve the problem.
Well, I lived in this house for 46 years, and we had a lot of trouble with it. We had to have new floors put in it, and then the roof started leaking, and I kept buying tar and stuff to tar the roof, and then I got in touch with Community Action, and Larry and Jay and all of them come up and looked at the house, said if they tried to jack it up and put a foundation and stuff under it, that it would collapse and fall down. So then they talked about building the new one. So then we...
The new house should be easier for her to maintain. She'll have a good, efficient heat system that we've put in there. The house is well insulated, so she won't be wasting a lot of her utility money.
I love it. I mean, it means the whole world to me. It's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I really thank them a lot for it.
Working with the resources that are there, we're not really able to keep pace with how quickly housing is deteriorating. As many houses as we can build or we can rehab, there's that many more houses that are slipping into substandard conditions or families who are needing assistance all at the same time. So we work as fast and as hard as we can just to try to maintain even, and unfortunately we still slip behind.
Congresswoman Eva Clayton.
The general trend for housing is no different than the general trend for other social programs. But in particular rural housing or rural programs, they always, even when we were more generous in responding to social needs, we were less generous to rural communities and did not see rural housing as a problem it was. So in this environment, you can expect that things are not very good, that it is going absolutely in the wrong direction.
Some of the most deplorable poverty and affordability problems in America can be seen in the colonias. Some 1,000 unincorporated neighborhoods along the U.S.-Mexico border.
The conditions in the colonias are typically lacking water and sewer and sanitary conditions in general, no solid waste facilities, electricity in some, and in others there isn't even electricity.
Alberto Ribais and his wife are farm workers. Their family rents this converted trailer with no running water and no electricity for $110 a month.
We have the toilet, but we have to carry water inside to flush it. We need electricity badly, because in this hot season, the food spoils quickly.
Tierra del Sol addresses the housing needs of farm worker families. One example is the rental apartment complex they developed and operate in Anthony, New Mexico.
I think there is a good program because the people who work in the fields are poor and we can't buy our own home or pay high rents. These programs help us to have a better life than before.
Tierra del Sol also helps low-income families move into home ownership.
You know what you put into it, especially when you sweat all that sweat, you work at it, you feel very proud about something like that, when you know you did it yourself.
The most extreme poverty in the United States can be found in the American Indian and Alaskan Native lands, where 2 out of 5 Native people live below the poverty line. Almost 20% of Native American households in these areas lack complete plumbing facilities.
The need for housing on Cheyenne River is great. Our existing housing stock is composed of approximately 2,900 houses. Of those, about 1,800 are in substandard condition.
With limited resources to build new homes, the reservation concentrates on rehabilitating existing housing. Cheryl Red Bear prepares grant and loan applications for critical home repairs to the Farmers Home Administration.
There's a lot of homes without plumbing. They're not safe. The heating systems are shot. There's no heat in the wintertime. The insulation is bad in most houses.
A low-interest loan allowed Regina Goodbear to purchase such necessities as a stove, water heater, and furnace.
I have my storm doors and hot water, and now I can cook, and I'm glad. I'm happy.
Despite the critical need for housing assistance, very few families are served.
It's very frustrating to see all those young families with their young children in their homes with no indoor plumbing or water, and just very frustrating.
The Brewer family has been waiting 5 years to move from their condemned trailer, where they live with their 3 young children.
No, I don't use the back room because the wind comes from this way all the time, from the west, and that's where we get the main. It's cold back there in the back, so we go up in the front, in the living room, where the heat stays in that little area there. I plastic all the windows off. My little girl here has asthma. During the winter when I'm making fire, that smoke, it gets to her lungs and it's hard breathing for her. I don't want my kids to grow up in this kind of place.
There clearly has not been enough money to address all these needs, so that resources continue to be a very, very important missing link in making a substantial headway in improving these housing conditions.
Life is going to get more miserable. Children are not going to be able to live in homes where there's running water. Developmental activities for children will be affected in proportion to their environment. I think all the indicators we know that creates a productive family life and the quality of life will be going in the wrong direction. People will suffer. The suffering will increase.
In the chronically depressed rural economy of the Mississippi Delta, housing for low-income families is deteriorating rapidly. Decades-old shotgun shacks and other dilapidated housing predominate. Decent, affordable housing is scarce.
Well, a lot of the houses have bad windows, bad doors, no insulation. That means the low-income people have to pay a real high gas bill. Some of them up as high as $200 a month. Paying a $200 gas bill leaves them a very small amount to live on. In some cases, there are houses that's unlivable, but people are still trying to live in them because there's nowhere for them to go.
The Delta Housing Corporation meets local housing needs with rental units and self-help housing. Like many other rural developers, it relies on the Farmers Home Administration's programs for funding.
In rural America, you just pretty much have the Farmers Home Administration to rely on. And without that program, we're in serious trouble.
Bob Nash is the Undersecretary of Agriculture in charge of the Farmers Home Administration.
There's a tremendous amount of need for rural low-income people as it relates to housing, and Farmers Home is one of the major resources in the country, but it's nowhere near meeting the need out in rural America. In the greatest, strongest country in the history of the world, it doesn't make sense for people to live in the kind of housing that I think people have seen on this video. And I think more people who live in urban and suburban areas, if they are more aware of the problems there, I think they'll be more supportive in terms of communicating to their congressmen and senators about the need to support rural development in general, and more particularly rural housing.
Our challenge is to educate the public in general about these problems, about these pockets of poverty, about people who live without running water, who have dirt floors in their homes. And once people begin to realize that those things exist within this country, I think they will be spurred to action. And as a result of that, I think the Congress will begin to respond to that action.
We just need to wake up America to the needs.